looking back in hindsight, it's like that was the time to have those conversations, but there was no context. There was context, but there was no navigating, know-how on navigating the conversation. Infertility kind of led you on the journey. That first day in the adoption office, kind of getting the information, what was that like for you? Like, just as somebody who's trying to figure this out.
I mean, it's a lot of information, obviously.
Yeah,
but I was just excited. I was ready to do it. Like I said, I am the impulsive one in the family. So if there's something I want to do, I mean, I guess internet was invented at that point, but it wasn't like everyone didn't just have ready access to it all the time like you do now. So if that were me today, I would have like been on the internet for, days afterwards, all the research and all.
Yeah.
Because that's what I do. I find out something and I'm like doing all the research on it. But yeah, I just wanted to do it and I wanted to know as much as I could know about it. I didn't have fear. Yeah. I just wanted to move forward with it.
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted a child. There's rightly so a lot of criticism in adoption, especially interracial adoption, about wanting to be a savior and all of that. Yeah. I can honestly tell you, I just wanted a child.
Right.
Yeah. And I did not care what the child looked like.
Yeah.
I just wanted a child. One of the hardest forms that people who have not adopted don't realize that you have to fill out.
Yeah.
As part of the adoption process is filling out what things are not acceptable.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, filling out that form and saying that you won't take certain children or certain illnesses or, whatever, disabilities, whatever, that is hard.
Yeah. Well, it has to be a little bit awkward to be like, I think that's one of the complications around adoption in general is that it's so consumery, you know what I mean? Right. And I think that form almost kind of, it goes from that excitement of like, oh, I just want to be a parent to you realize that this is a not like a purchase, but it's a transactional thing where like I have to really decide what I'm doing and what I want here.
Right.
Which I think pulls out a lot of interesting emotions. It pulls out a lot of interesting emotions for adoptees, which is why I think we see so much criticism of adoption. But then it also, as the person who may be there for all the right reasons, recenters this kind of like awkward balance that adoption puts us in.
Well, and you have to realistically examine yourself. Like, what am I capable of?
Right.
And sometimes doing that kind of soul searching is hard.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's tough, and I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that every adoption agency that I've had to work through has talked about is that form. Yeah. And kind of the awkwardness of that form and how they feel like most people lie on that form because it's an awkward position to be in. You went there, you kind of got the information, you guys obviously decided to kind of like go through with the process. Right. Like what was the next steps that they put you through?
So we had all the paperwork. We only, this was, I understand why it happened.
Right.
And, 20 years later, things are very different now, and this probably would not have happened. But we had 1 day of training.
Wow.
That, like I said, that office had not dealt with anyone but infants at that point. And so, so they didn't even have anyone in line, but, and they wanted to get you in a home quickly. They didn't want you to go from, spend a lot of time in foster care.
Yeah.
They wanted the process to move as quickly as possible for your health. Meant that we didn't get a lot of training.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Really any.
Yeah, really any. And that's, it's not that uncommon even for adoptions at that time period or before. What was the day of training that you did? Like, what, if you remember anything, because I know it's been a while. Do you remember anything about it? I don't remember
anything about it. I just remember I was looking for books constantly. Like there was no training on how do I take care of the skin? How do we joke about the fact that minorities go through puberty earlier than white kids. We had no clue.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Exactly.
Your dad stood in the aisle of Food Lion waiting for a black person to come through the aisle to ask what to put on your skin.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
again, this was before people were really
Well, you
using
know
the
what you
internet a
do.
lot too.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a real struggle. And
yeah.
yeah, some of the earliest work that really examined that came out, like just came out the year I was adopted.
Yeah.
Like, and would not have been known
Right.
to the masses really.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously had an effect on so many children around my age who kind of grow up in a confusing situation with their racial identity. And then obviously parents who even want to search it out are having difficulty finding it.
Right. Yeah. So we went from there to as soon as they felt like things were going to go, but you couldn't move in with us yet, us having visitations with you. Okay. So you actually, your mom and grandmother dropped you off. You went into a foster home. You were there for a week or two, and then that family needed to leave the state for some reason, and they couldn't take you with them for legality purposes. And because it looked like you were going to be going into a home, they decided to, instead of getting you respite care, they would just put you in another foster home. So you went from that foster home to another foster home to us. So you actually had 4 homes within a month.
Wow.
So that's another trauma to your experience.
Absolutely.
We had a visit at the home of your foster mother. And I couldn't leave, like it had to be supervised. So I had to stay in the room. Actually, we had a visit at the adoption agency, and we had to stay in the room with the social workers. Then we had a visit at the home of the second foster home. And again, she had to stay with us. They started calling me Mommy Julie to you as kind of like a transition. Yeah. I think now that was probably unhealthy for you because just that name Mommy, you associated that with your birth mother. Right. And so when I went to leave you, it was the third time I'd seen you. Yeah. It was extremely traumatic. You clung to me, you cried and cried, and legally there was nothing I could do about that. I still think that's at the top of one of the most difficult things in my life I had to do was leave you there that day. Yeah. And then they finally let us take you unsupervised, so we picked you up and then took you down to Lake Caroline. Mm-hmm. And my whole family was there, and we had a big day you've seen pictures of that. Yeah.
I have seen
on the playground.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a big picnic on the lake and, lots of time to meet all the cousins and that kind of stuff. And then I think it was probably about a week later that you moved in with us.
Yeah. Man, the story of clinging has to live somewhere inside of my body too, because it is a weird transition for a 2-year-old, I think. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? We have Eden now, and so it'd be like putting him through that ringer. Yeah. And we're almost kind of getting the visual representation of that again.
Well, just knowing how much they're capable of bonding at that point.
Exactly.
And then just seemed like every step of the way, your attachment was being shredded.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think so many adopted children go through that. 2 is also a different age to be adopted, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like it's a little bit older than a lot of kids get adopted. A lot of kids get adopted at infants. Right. And that has its own trauma. Mm-hmm. But the 2-year-old, the separation kind of over and over and over again, I feel like I felt the residual impacts of that in my life. I think there is like a level of just wanting to feel the other side of a lot of those things. Mm-hmm. To wanting to relate deeper to other people in general. And so it's like there's the disconnect for like us growing up and like the ability to overcome it. I feel like we've gotten closer, but it's like the disconnect and that attachment thing, it lives in so many different forms. Right.
Well, and again, that was one thing we had no education on.
Well, yeah.
The only thing that happened was we had home study visits for the next year, once a month for the next year until the adoption was final. And one time the social worker came in and you went running up to her and hugged her. Yeah. And she said, "Does he do that to everyone?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "I don't know. I don't think so because he clings to me, and he certainly, if he's in public and gets hurt or is looking for his mom, it's always me that he comes to." And she said, "Oh, okay. Well, that can be a sign of attachment issues." Yeah. That's the only conversation we ever had. You were so happy, and you did I feel like, attached to me.
Yeah.
But it was almost like you had two lives going on.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
I think like I felt that way a lot, but I also think so many adoptees feel that way.
Yeah.
Like there's these two parallel things happening. And yeah, Dad always tells stories of like me with his students growing up, or like different, just my comfortability moving through spaces at like such a young age. And like the more I've learned about adoption, the more I've been like, oh man,
Like that should have been huge red flags.
That was a huge, like this 2-year-old should not feel like the celebrity at a basketball game. Right. Like he should not be like going from stand to stand by, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's not like it wasn't an unsafe environment.
No. Like we would stand at the door coming in. It was a small auditorium. It wasn't like it was like a big NBA arena or something. Yeah. It was a high school gym, but we would walk in with you and you would start and walk all the way down the bleachers. The cheerleaders would stop cheering. I mean, seriously, you were like in the senior pictures that year as like the mascot for their class. And I remember a friend standing beside me being like, he's going to be the first black president.
Wow. Obama beat me by just a little bit, right?
But no, it was huge red flags. But we didn't know. Like I said, one day of training. And I am pretty confident that I can say they did not touch on that in that training. Yeah. And that, I think it would make so much sense just because it was so not even a conversation. Right.
And we see the impacts of it now, not just with me, but with so many other kids.
I feel stupid saying that now.
Yeah.
I really do. I feel ignorant saying that now.
Well, I think
but
most
it was just
people
a different
do.
World.
Well, I also think most people do because even how you would have been introduced to adoption would have been, from one, like the religious standpoint, just like a positive thing to do, a service to the world almost. But then also from the infertility standpoint, it was a solution. And so you were introduced to it in two ways that wouldn't deem any like deeper discussion.
They want you to see the best. Like everybody wanted you to see the best part of it.
Yeah, there was no deeper discussion. No one wants to talk
about the negativity.
Yeah, and so nobody was gonna give you like a 5-minute stand beside to be like, well, you should also think about this,
right?
Because it's wrapped in all this kind of fluff, which I think, prospectively looking at now, I can see why. I can also see that a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily wrong either. That there is so much good that has come out of me being adopted by you guys, by so many adoptees being adopted. There's been so many positives that you can't necessarily say that adoption, or my adoption particularly, has been bad. But I think that the problem comes to where you have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old who has no ability to connect with anybody, just monstrously attention hogging.
Right.
It's just like it comes through to where because it's wrapped in so much kind of, gold, right, you forget to look for the signs of disconnect.
Well, I think with your generation, up until even recent, maybe it's still the case, but starting with your generation, it was the popular thing. It was a popular thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so when things are popular, no one's talking about hardness of it. Yeah. No one wants hard things to be popular, or popular things to be hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because you tell me stories all the time now, and I think it's because you're open, and like we're a pretty open family in general, whether it's like adoption related or just other stuff. But you tell me stories all the time of people coming to you talking about their kids being angry about adoption at a young age. And it also rings true in my case too, where I was angry about adoption at a young age. And that's the stuff that I think you needed, your friends needed, my friends of mine who were adopted, their parents needed, that this was not going to be so glamorous all over. And parenting isn't in general, right? No. But there was a different level, I think, of, like, I just remember the discontentment for me, kind of in hindsight, wasn't even necessarily about anything going on. It was just about the anger that I felt about knowing that I had been placed for adoption. Yeah. Like, I've always been so that has always been, and I hate that it always has been, but like I feel like sometimes I was like 5, it's always been so clear for
Yeah.
me.
I found your shredded adoption papers the other day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, really? Yeah, the ones that I ripped up.
When you were
Yeah,
7, you ripped up your adoption papers. We still have them in a
right.
lockbox. They're shredded, but
They're
they
still
can't
there.
catch on fire.
Yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
that's the seed that was
Yeah.
there. It was like that, and it's crazy to think that was also in like the 2-year-old who's going around the gymnasium. Like
Yeah.
the confusion is building,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's hard to think back on because I don't think there's necessarily anyone to blame either.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like there's so much that I've learned about adoption throughout the last like 40, 60 years of adoption that's taken place. And I think whether it's becoming a parent myself or just knowing all the things that have come up, it's like almost nobody who in my generation had parents that understood anything that was going on with them. Like I haven't found the adoptee that I've talked to yet that had the adoptive parent that understood what they were going through, that wasn't somehow like an advanced adoption professional.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Like even little things like the first night you moved in with us, you know, we grew up you grew up in a time when like, I don't even want to I won't even say the title of the book because it comes with such negativity. And like, I've certainly moved from that, but we're trying to follow these, we're being, good Christian parents and following all of these rules. So like the first night, like if you got to sleep in your bed, you can't sleep in the room with us. And here's a 2-year-old that's been like, has had attachment ripped into multiple times already, having night terrors. And we're saying you have to stay in your room.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Or we took away your, well, now we didn't know this. You came with a little pair of Tigger slippers. Mm-hmm. We did not realize those were your security. No one told us that.
Yeah.
So we put those in the closet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So took away your security and put you in the bed by yourself, and just things that we just did not know. It's very interesting. James Dobson, a lot of Christian families will know who he was. He wrote a ton of family books. And I don't really, he's not someone that I just like read his stuff and follow everything that he says. But one thing that he said in a parenting book was he wrote a chapter on adoption, and like the first sentence in it was, throw away every piece of parenting advice you've ever been given. It doesn't apply to adopted kids.
Yeah. That is a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. And so and thankfully we read, maybe someone had given us that book of his as a shower gift or something for you, because we read it early on, just like within a few days to weeks of you moving in. So then we were like, oh, he should be sleeping in the room. Like we shouldn't be listening to all of that.
Yeah.
And so we did backtrack on a lot of that.
Yeah.
But that was.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
And it's tough because there's nothing you can do, I think.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think that's like, I'm not sure if that's tough for you as much as it is for me, but it's like there's nothing you can do about any of it.
How often do I, a few times a year, just out of the blue, you find me crying to you, apologizing for every mistake we made, and you're like, Mom, it's okay. We've moved on, But I can't, as a parent, I can't shake it. It's emotional for me now.
I feel it too. It's hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard to think about just because I don't think about it just from me, but I think that there's just like, whether it was me that you adopted or another kid, it would have been the same situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, you got to think about how many times this is happening over.
Right.
And that hurts me too, I think, another degree, where it's like, yes, this is my journey, and we've had a way to work through it and build connections. Mm-hmm. But there's also like probably a family right now that's adopting, and maybe they've had better training because times are different. But
I still don't. Obviously, better training was needed, but will probably always be needed. Like I don't. That the advice we received, adoption always begins in death. Yeah. And death is a cyclical grieving process that never goes away.
Right.
So at every transition in your life, you grieve death.
Absolutely.
And so for an adopted kid, you could be grieving at a transition when you're 50 years old.
Yeah,
Kind of
absolutely.
thing. And so I don't, even with the best training in the world, the hardness doesn't go away.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going away.
Yeah.
And I think that's better confronted than ignored.
Right.
I think that people actually build stronger bonds when it's when it's confronted. And I think the more that we've been able to talk about the reality of that, it's actually gotten better for us too.
Yeah.
Whether it was like racial dynamics and talking about those things and how that's affected me, but then also just kind of getting into like just the pain that I felt, or talking about things from my relationship with my birth mom that have whether hurt me or felt me feel connected.
Right.
And it's like those things, I think when we live in them, when we're talking about them, when they're a part of the discussion rather than hidden,
Right.
at least I feel like we're in a better place and like I'm in a better place.
Yeah. Well, an adoptive family has to provide trust, security, and safety to an adopted child. And that doesn't stop when they turn 16, 18, 21. Like that's a lifetime commitment. Yeah. And we've kind of parented all of our kids that way just because we started with you.
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well,
but you can't provide those three things if you're not in open communication and living in a very honest, raw, which is scary to people who haven't had to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's why we're kind of a outcast in our Christian community sometimes.
Yeah, it's a lot of rawness all the time because there's always also been so many heavy emotions.
Right.
Too. It's like I've always been a heavy emotion guy, and I've also always, I felt like, been so kind of like my way, highway kind of guy. And you've also been a my way, highway kind of person. And so we have so many budding intersections throughout our family that I think that people who haven't had to have that, where things have kind of been soft, don't realize that like that's just the reality of, I think, our authentic life.
Right.
And I think it's benefited actually more of our family members than it's hurt. Yeah. If that makes sense.
I hope so. That's
I think so. I think everybody feels the ability to be very real, and I think that is rare. Yeah. I think that there's not a ton. I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit because they're still teenagers, but there's not. I feel like there's not as much hiding, right? Especially among the siblings as there historically was. But even in general, because we joked about like trying to like see if we could shock dad or frustrate you. It's like a lot of stuff just comes out anyway. Yeah. And we make it a part of, I think, whether it's a lesson that you're giving us, a lecture about how wrong it is what we just said was, right? Or whether it's something that we laugh about, it comes out in an authentic way, which I think definitely has made me feel more secure, way more secure over time. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm adopted. I'm in the family. You know, I guess finalization. So you're doing the monthly visits. Yeah. You're introducing, obviously, me to family. Right. What is that process like? Because that's different, too, because no pregnancy, right? Straight to it, and I'm 2.
Right. The family loved you. Everyone was so excited. Like I said, we were in the South, which is interesting because there were some questions. I remember when we decided to adopt you, I didn't know how my family would take it. So I actually wrote them a letter for my sister to read to everyone else when I left. And it was just basically like, we're going to do this. And, we don't care what people think about it, kind of thing. Giving a child a home is more important than what society says about interracial adoption and things like that. Yeah. And they were just like, what? Like, why was this necessary? Yeah. So they were all fine with it. Yeah. But this is not the time to get into this, but as you realized growing up, and I don't know all the terms all that used, but like the racism that is not as much noticed or not intentional. Yeah. I feel like we've had a lifetime of me living in deep emotions over trying to protect you from that. Right. Yeah. But introducing you to them, like that was all fine. It was more like just the
life of it all.
Yeah, the life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so connecting with the family was pretty natural and normal. Yeah. And how soon, I know you mentioned that on one of my visitations I met your family. How soon did I meet like dad's family?
Just like 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later.
Yeah.
Okay, so everything happened relatively.
Yeah,
quickly.
everything happened quick. We had to publish for your father's rights because he was nowhere to be found to sign off.
Okay.
So that's why it was not final for a year.
Okay.
So for that year, we're walking on eggshells.
Right.
And, it's a very difficult emotional position to be in because as an adoptive parent, I never want to take a child from a parent who wants their child and can take care of their child.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you're living for this year thinking, what if I don't get to keep him? Which you lived that with Micah 10 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we had the same situation.
Same situation, yeah.
So you're every night putting this child to bed thinking, am I going to get to keep them?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like the angel on one side and the demon on the other side. And at the same time thinking, but if a biological parent wants them and it's a healthy situation, I have to be willing to hand them back over.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a tough place.
Yeah.
It's a tough place.
Yeah.
And a lot, man, that's another one that a lot of people go through.
Yeah.
And it's good. Like you said, it's like that and I don't think we've ever found my birth dad. Like, we've never found him. But it is true, like, if that would have been the best place for me, that would have been a good thing. But doesn't excuse the hardness of the day in and out, meeting the family.
Right.
Everything's kind of shaping up, the baby showers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Got all the toys. That would have been a tough situation.
Right. Because we had to treat you like we had to give you, if we had gone for a year and not treated you as a family member, that would have been detrimental to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's just hard. It's just hard stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard stuff.
Yeah.
And you're pregnant. What is this? 6 months later?
6 months later.
So everything's going. You're doing the monthly check-ins. Family's going. What was it like even? Because, well, let me say it like this. We know, at least from my experience talking with other adoptive moms, is that when you adopt, and let me know if this is you, when you adopt, you don't go through the exact same thing as like giving birth, but you do go through a form of what might be postpartum.
Well, yeah. One of the best books, well, I said there weren't a lot of books. There was one book, and I don't remember what it was called, but it was Post-Adoption Blues. Okay. It might have been called that.
Yes.
But that might be the name of the book. And that's real.
Yeah.
Like that's a real thing. Both your dad and I went through that.
I believe it. Yeah.
When I had Sarah, we'd had a good friend who has had a very similar stories to ours. And the father actually said to her, actually, he would never even hold Sarah when she was born because it made him hurt so much that they couldn't have a baby at that time. Yeah. But I remember him saying to me, adopting a child is a cure for parenting, not a cure for birth.
Yeah.
For birthing a child. I forgot how he worded that. But and so I'd had that warning. So that was nice to have been able to have had that.
Yeah.
But it's true. And then you're going through all the hormones. I had horrible postpartum with Sarah.
Yeah.
And part of it too, not only am I having all the hormones, the whole adoption versus bio thing, but I had 7 years of waiting to birth a child, multiple miscarriages. Yeah. And then I feel awful saying this, but it almost felt anticlimactic. Like I'm holding this baby. What do I do now?
Well, it has to.
Yeah. I have lived this journey for 7 years and now it's over. Like what I do.
Such is life.
Yeah. So that was hard. It was just a lot of hardness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you step almost back into the ringer.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about kind of like this post-adoption kind of blues series. Good friend Anna Coley talks about adopting after infertility and talks a lot about the concept you already mentioned, which is like placement for parenting, not a replacement for birthing, which is that a lot of people who adopt after infertility don't think about whether the parenting experience that they're looking for is parenting or if it's giving birth.
Right.
And like not knowing that can also lead to its own adoption
Right.
blues. And then you do give birth
Yeah.
like less than a year later, and you go through a whole nother process
Right.
of that. Um,
And you know, your dad and I, we are just now learning on our journey that we don't have to just grin and bear it.
right.
And it's not like we've ever been against counseling and therapy and all of that. We've always thought it's great, but we've always been like, this is our life. What are we going to do? Just keep
Yeah.
going. You know,
Yeah.
not that. And so through all of that, through everything you went through, we just had this grin and bear it,
Yeah.
mentality. And so we weren't probably dealing with things in a healthy way.
Mm.
Not sweeping it under the rug in denial, but just like life is hard, man. So
Yeah.
everybody, it's
Exactly.
hard for everybody. So just keep going. Just, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
And we are very much those people. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody to a degree is like that. I've been like that with a lot of things. It's just you just keep pushing through. And I think the back to back of it, especially in those early days of like adopting, you're in a and I'm also thinking about like the season that you're in is like you're also waiting to see
Right.
if the adoption is going to be kind of like finalized.
You're
But you're
living with a
also-
layer of anxiety
Yeah.
24/7.
But then you're also pregnant.
Yeah.
And so that becomes its own
And on
thing.
bed rest.
And on bed rest. So
Yeah.
there's like this kind of compiling
Yeah.
things that are happening.
Yeah.
Sarah's born. Obviously, you have some complications maybe around feeling because it's anticlimactic. I could see it being anticlimactic too.
Yeah.
I could understand where that would happen just because so many years of waiting. But now there's two of us.
Yeah.
And how inside of you does that feel? Like that you're kind of now you adopted because you wanted a child, but now there's two
Right.
kind of relatively quickly.
So I never got to have an infant and like ease into parenting.
Yeah.
I started parenting with an Eden,
Yeah.
like with a
exactly.
2-year-old. That was
Exactly.
wild.
Yeah, exactly. Wild guys.
It's getting hurt. I said the other day, you got hurt so often
Yeah.
that we lived halfway between Fredericksburg and Richmond.
Yeah.
So we would take turns at hospitals, emergency rooms, because we didn't want people to think we were abusing.
Yeah.
You were getting hurt all the time.
Yes.
On Sarah's due date, and I was huge, and I was off bed rest at this point because it was fine as she came.
Yeah.
I was huge. And carrying her or carrying you into an emergency room because you were running so fast, you ran into the door frame in the hallway at my mom's house. So hit your head so hard that it cracked the door frame. So like in the ER with you, like, am I going to give birth here too?
Yeah. That sounds about right. I
Yeah.
feel like there's endless stories of the things I used to do.
so that's crazy.
That age range.
Yeah. So but yeah, it was just, having a 2-year-old or actually, I guess you were 3 by then, and newborn. I think it was just so busy,
Yeah.
and your dad was working 6 days a week, and that's when he was selling cars.
Yeah.
So, just a lot was on me,
Yeah.
and so I just didn't have time
Yeah.
for anything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to wallow in anything else. It was just the busy.
Just go, go, go.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you remember I was helping take care of my mom, so taking her to doctor's appointments and things like that.
Wow.
So it was just a lot. It was a time period where I felt like there was a lot on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, early parenting, I guess. But then just
Yeah.
double fold.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The infant.
Yeah.
I wonder what going from adopting a 2-year-old to having an infant to having that infant experience. It's like, what do you feel like that infant experience with Sarah gave you versus kind of like the transition of just adopting at 2? Because it's very different. There was
Right.
probably like a healing piece of just being a parent, kind of being into that. But then there's also now the infant experience, which you didn't get to experience with me.
Right. I mean, sure. There was just the whole hormonal experience, the whole giving
Yeah.
birth, the whole bonding
Yeah.
immediately,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
absolutely.
Although it's our life is just so stressful.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, I had trouble nursing Sarah,
yeah.
so I got to the point where I hated feeding her,
Yeah.
and so she and I couldn't bond very well
Yeah.
because of that. And then finally, I just had to say, I don't know, she was probably 2 months. Actually, the pediatrician at 2 months old told me that she was hitting failure to thrive. So I had to switch to formula.
Yes, it's for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she and I didn't really bond until that point
Yeah.
because I hated every feeding session. It was her screaming for an hour, you know?
Yeah. Don't have that with the 2-year-olds.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. And Sarah never liked to be held.
Yeah.
Like she wanted to be rolling around all the time.
Yeah.
You, whether it was craving that or just being a cuddly person, I don't know, liked to be held.
Yeah. Big baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that was an interesting dynamic.
Interesting dynamic.
But obviously, I mean, like hormonally, I mean, we're just created generally. I know it's not true for everyone, but generally speaking, females are created to crave that experience.
Yeah.
You know, I'm way past that point in my life now, but then every once in a while I will think, oh, what would it be like to have another baby? And then I shake my head and say, what am I thinking?
Yeah. But I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting timing to get both of those experiences at the very similar time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's you. And it also speaks to like Sarah's and I's closeness growing up because I really didn't experience.
Oh, you guys were buddies, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really experience too much of like adopted life without Sarah.
Right.
You know, less than a year.
Right. And
or
you
maybe
probably don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember anything really before Sarah.
Yeah.
And so Sarah and I have almost exclusively grown up together.
Yeah.
Which is really, I think, been really cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't remember a time without Sarah, and Sarah can't really remember a time without me. And so I think that's really beautiful for our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really kind of worked out for our family in a very unique way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know? So you have like the school that welcomes obviously me and you adopting, but you also have like a life. So you have a life outside of job, you have a life outside of family, you have friends. What was like the friend, like other community reaction to you adopting?
So I had, interestingly enough, an infertility support group.
Okay.
that I went to. And I don't know, there were 4 or 5 ladies. And within, I guess we were just adopting you when I joined that group.
Yeah.
And then within a year, we were all pregnant, either through IVF or different things.
Yeah.
So bringing you into that group, they, they had kids your age as well.
Yeah.
You're Connor, Brenna, you remember that group?
Yeah.
Of people. So they were accepting of you. Interesting thing about Virginia is it was actually pretty diverse.
Yeah.
So we went to a New City Fellowship Church, whose whole mission was to be a diverse church.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have issues as often of you always being the only different person everywhere you went.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So people were, again, very happy for us. One of the interesting things about New City that I loved, this was the most education we ever received, was they had these things called News Around You. And they would have their Black church members hosting, or we would have a potluck lunch, and their Black church members would then give like a little seminar on certain perspectives of the Black community. So there are things that I heard for the first time, like, when a white woman flips her hair in front of Black women, how just incredibly offensive that is, kind of thing. Yeah. Things that white women just would never think of, like you didn't know. So that was a great place to be when we brought you home, when we had you. There was an older woman in the church who decided to take you in. She was a single lady. I don't know what her story was, but she had adult children as well. So she would take you home after church some Sundays just to hang out with her. Do you remember this at all?
I don't. Yeah, I don't.
Miss Celestine was her name. Yeah. And then when she would have like birthday parties or holidays, or not holidays, but because you'd be with us, but any celebrations with her family, she would bring you so that you could be around other black people and that kind of thing. But then she would also invite your sister sometimes. Yeah. So like we did Santa on the train one year, and she invited, so she and I took you and Sarah kind of thing to that. So you had a lot of those kinds of opportunities in Virginia. And I think that's one reason that, I mean, we would have dealt with identity issues anyway.
Right.
But our start was pretty good.
Yeah.
Like and we didn't have to work for it. We lived in a community where it was already provided.
Where it was already provided.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's good. It also makes the transition, I think, easier for everybody, right? Because for you, it's like you already have a community that can kind of walk you through some things.
Right, yeah. But then you had the flip side.
Yeah.
Do you remember the time you were playing in the backyard with your cousins? I've told you the story.
Yeah.
You'll remember.
Yeah.
I look out the window and you have a rope tied to you. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
So these are the ignorant, like the blissful ignorant comments that come from white people that don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
You know, and I yell outside, "Stop pulling him by a rope. That's dangerous."
Yeah.
And your response was, "It's okay, Mom. I'm the slave."
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing, which we can laugh about now.
Yeah.
Was not funny, obviously. That was one of my mama bear moments that I lost my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I mean, the countless, I think, stories like that that kids who are adopted by white families have are rough.
Yeah.
And I think you probably felt the weight of it right there when it's happening in your backyard.
Yeah. And I did, and constantly was, like I said, being the mama bear and losing my mind, protecting you.
Right.
This 20 years later, I realized it actually wasn't a protection to hide it off from you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That you needed to be educated on that.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, even from those young points of like why that would be wrong.
Right.
You know, and also like to our cousin, like, you know, to defend the cousins, like to let them also be cued into why this would be wrong. And I think that's one of the rough areas that we don't talk about.
We don't talk about, which is interesting because every time we have had a raw conversation with them, it's been very well accepted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's just we're nervous about it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, 20, I guess to be 23, 22 years ago, really.
Yeah.
Like, I think looking back in hindsight, it's like that was the time to have those conversations, but there was no context. There was context, but there was no navigating, know-how on navigating the conversation.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of that frustration and complication comes, especially probably inside of you trying to figure out how to react.
Right. It's
like there's no roadmap for how you talk to another 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old about why this is wrong, other than the plain out, right?
Well, and it's a dynamic that I don't even think I can put words to. Yeah. Like, you love your family dearly.
Right.
Your family loves you.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you have an incredible extended family.
Yeah.
But to also know that there are hard conversations that you're afraid to have with them.
Yeah.
Like, it's just it's something that's hard to put words to and very hard to understand if you aren't walking through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah. And did you ever have to have conversations like at church that you felt like, because it sounds like church was a big community for you guys in Virginia. Do you feel like I know you said it's kind of diverse, but did you ever feel like there was also that kind of awkwardness there as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like our whole life has been me hearing comments that are offensive to you and either being pushed to the edge that I say whatever I'm thinking or biting my tongue to keep peace.
Right.
And like I've lived
in between those two things.
And that tug of war for all of raising you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So you're dealing with it on these multiple fronts, and I'm sure there's also like grocery store situations, random life.
One of the first, this is not so much of a racial issue, but the summer we adopted, you came home in June, obviously, right before your birthday, King's Dominion, big amusement park. We had gone, we were in the water park, and I was just sitting on the edge of the little pool, and you were playing around my feet. And another mom looks at me and says, "This poor kid, where's his mom? Did they just desert him?"
Yeah.
And it was I had probably only had you a few weeks.
Yeah.
And I had no clue how to respond to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awkward moment.
Yeah. So just lots of those, I mean, we can talk about these another episode for raising a white teenager and a black teenager at the same time.
Yeah.
Just how different.
Yeah.
That was.
You're running a lot of parallels all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, just the watching people watching you more closely in a store than they're watching Sarah, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Now, there's a lot of people in general who adopt, but there's also a lot of people who are in this awkward transition that you're talking about, and that we've talked about a lot of this episode, between like adopting and introducing to community and life. If you were to like share with other people how to navigate that, looking back, because obviously a lot of things went really well for you, a lot of acceptance things, but there's also things that obviously you said you wish went differently.
Well, yeah. Where the acceptance didn't come is behavioral issues.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your skin was okay.
Yeah.
When we first got you, but like I said, adoption begins in grief or begins in death. If a child's mother had physically died, everyone is extremely gracious about behavioral issues and different things going on. For an adopted child, it's just judgment. Why aren't they thankful? Why, what, kind of thing. And so I would say from the time we got you, there was very little grace for the acting out, for the grief you were going through. And that was the hardest thing from day one. And where I'm constantly in protective mode. So, if I'm talking to new people, or to people who are going through this transition, you've got your three things: trust, safety, and security. And that's what's most important. Not what your community thinks, not what your family thinks. You are raising this child so that they know they can trust you, so that they feel safe, and so they feel secure. And you've just got to put blinders on to everything else going on around you. You want to have a relationship with them when they're 30.
Right.
It doesn't matter what these other people think. Yeah. It does not matter. You won't have a relationship with them probably then. But you want to make sure these things are in place that you do with your child.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.